Hello guys, it's Rhino and welcome to one more Rhino preview. Today I have a very special game to show you that is all about politics, economics, and how it all works. Hegemony, which is launching on Kickstarter very shortly, is an asymmetric political card-driven board game for 2 to 4 players that simulates a whole nation. You take on the role of a specific group, and with your economic strategies and your political intrigues, you try to increase your class's power and lead your people to prosperity and wealth. In the game, you build companies, initiate strikes, engage in foreign trade, propose policies, create unions, expand your political influence, while also building a bridge between those gameplay concepts and their real-life applications. This is not only giving you a great overview of how economy works, but you're also experiencing in the game all the different aspects of it. It's important also to mention that the game was made in cooperation with renowned academics and uses theoretical concepts such as socialism, neoliberalism, nationalism, globalism, without prescribing any ideology. So here's the entire board of the game. We have set up a game of 4 players, so all classes are in play. The game is played over 5 rounds. At the end of the 5th round, we have an additional endgame step, and we also apply the endgame scoring, and then the player with the most victory points will be the winner. Since every role in the game plays differently, as it's an asymmetric game, we'll first see each role, how it works, and what they're after, and also we're gonna see how a phase in the game goes to get the flow of it, and to see how everything is interconnected. Let's start with the capitalist class. The capitalist has some available companies that they can decide to build and run. These companies, of course, need to hire workers in order to produce goods and services. The capitalist then sells those for profit, and their goal is to increase their revenue and then eventually to turn their revenue into more and more capital. The working class has workers, skilled and unskilled ones, who work in exchange for money, which they use to cover their basic needs: food, health, education, and, if possible, entertainment. Here's how many workers are currently in the game, and here's the population number each spot corresponds to. The population track here is a very important concept that ties with multiple other functions in the game. For example, it dictates the maximum for each good and service that they can buy from one source, the taxes they need to pay, and also the food they need to provide at the end of the round to cover their needs. This player's goal is to cover the food and other needs to the best extent possible and provide health, education, and luxury to its people, so to increase their workers' prosperity. The higher prosperity is, the more VPs the player gets. The middle class is somewhere in the middle between the 2 previous roles. It also has workers who work in various companies gaining income, but is also able to run its own smaller companies. Again, population is very important for the middle class player, as it dictates the quantity of resources they will need to spend when performing certain actions, as well as their buying limit. There's also a prosperity track, which is increased when the middle class provides health, education, or luxury to its people, as well as through savings. The higher the prosperity, the more VP the player gains. This player will need to find the perfect balance between producing, selling, and consuming so that they cover the workers' needs and that they increase their prosperity. Finally, the state is trying to increase its legitimacy, trying hard to keep all the classes satisfied and in balance. So it tries to increase legitimacy as much as possible, but ideally evenly. At the end of each round, the state scores VPs based on the 2 lowest scores. At the same time, it tries to deal with any societal issues that arise. So now let's see what a round in a game looks like. We first have the preparation phase, then the action phase, production, then elections, and then the scoring phase. Starting with the working class and following a set player order, each player on their turn chooses one of the cards in their hand to perform one main action. They either play the effect on the chosen card, or they can discard it to perform a basic action. Each player has a different set of basic actions available to them, and also a different deck of cards, of course. The basic actions, as an example for the capitalists, include building or selling a company, proposing a bill, selling to the foreign market, make business deals, or lobbying, while for the working class, the basic actions include assigning workers, buying goods and services, doing a demonstration to pressure the other players to build more companies, so to open more job positions for their class, or they can go on a strike to hopefully have their wages increased, and so on. A player also may perform one free action either before or after their main action. In the free actions we have pay off a loan, use one good or service to gain one prosperity while upgrading one of your workers to a skilled one if you're working or middle class, adjust the wages offered in their companies if you are the capitalist, and so on. Then in the production phase, we have the various companies in the game producing goods and services, and also the workers having their wages paid. So any player who controls companies pays the listed wages for each company to the player who controls the workers there. Each company also produces the listed amount of goods or services, and the player who owns the company adds them to their storage areas. Then we move on to the cover needs step of this phase, in which the middle class and the working class have to cover the basic needs of their people. This is done by consuming food equal to their population rank, and if they do not have enough food, they must buy it from any combination of sources, as in the other players. Last, players pay their taxes to the state. This is dictated by the taxation policy that is currently in effect. The capitalist's tax will be then determined by the taxation policy, the tax multiplier, and the revenue of this round. The middle and working classes taxation is different and is also dependent on the labor policy. And after this, we move on to the elections phase. That is one of the most exciting phases in the game, as there is voting involved. We refill the bag with voting cubes from the middle class, the capitalist class, and the working class. The working class adds cubes equal to its population. The capitalist class adds cubes equal to the number of its operational companies, and the middle class adds cubes either to its population or operational companies, whichever of those two values is higher. The state does not have cubes of its own, so it doesn't add anything in the bag. Instead, it gains influence based on its lowest legitimacy score. And before we move on to carrying out the elections, let's talk a little bit about influence. This influence collected by the state can only be used by the state and is not sold. But there's also the influence produced primarily by media companies and are given to the owners of those companies. The working class can get influence from its trade unions and can buy it also from the state. Influence cubes play a very important role in influencing the voting of the policies, as we'll see. Now back to the elections. For each bill proposed during the action phase, there will be an election taking place. Starting with the first bill, players state whether they are in favor or against changing the policy as suggested by the proposed bill, and of course the player who proposed the bill is in favor by default. You then draw 5 cubes from the voting bag and place them here on the board based on the player's preferences. This is the initial outcome, but the players are then given the option to affect it by spending influence. They can bid as much influence as they want from what they have in front of them by placing it secretly in their hands. Then everyone reveals at the same time, and each cube spent counts as an additional vote for the player's initial choice. If the in favor option has equal or more votes than against, the bill passes. The player who proposed it gains 3 VP, and all other players who were in favor as well get 1 VP. If the against option has more votes than in favor, the bill does not pass. Note that after the outcome is determined, only the cubes of the winning side are discarded, the ones of the losing side return back to the bag, and we move on to the next proposed bill. The policies table is a really good abstraction and one of the strongest ones education-wise. As a general overview, on the left of this table are policies more favorable for the working class, and on the right, more neoliberal policies that would suit the capitalist more. And each policy affects many different things in the game and all players. Fiscal policy determines the size of the public sector and the amount of loans that the state may get before it collapses and the IMF intervenes. Labor market determines the minimum wage allowed. Taxation determines the amount that each class will have to pay to the state each round, and so on. We also have these two policies. Foreign trade policy determines the price of the tariffs imposed upon imported goods. Immigration determines whether the country's borders are open or closed to immigrants. Whenever a player needs to get an additional worker due to this policy, they draw a card from the immigration deck, taking the corresponding meeple and placing it in the unemployed workers area. And the last step in a phase is the scoring phase, in which players get to score additional points based on their progress. The game ends at the end of the 5th round. Players are given a last chance to pay off any loans they may have, and then the final score is calculated after adding some additional VPs. The capitalist class, depending on the number of neoliberal policies, so the policies that have ended up on this side of the policies table, is awarded extra VPs. Also, the goods and services they have still on their board gives them some extra points. The working class similarly gets points depending on the amount of socialist policies and VPs according to their remaining money. The middle class has both the services and goods as well as the remaining money, giving points, and also gets extra points depending on how many policies are on the middle section B. Last, the state is awarded points depending on the money left in its treasury and on the goods and services left on its storages. So this was Hegemony in a nutshell. It is definitely a theme and format that hasn't been tried before in a Eurogame, and it also can lead to interesting discussions and observations about how one player's decisions can affect all others. And there's also some cases where there can be some role-playing involved, which allows you to experience the theme to its fullest. I personally wish that I could have played this game when I was at school or at the uni, and that would have resulted in me loving economics much more or much sooner. The game is full of meaningful choices and a vast selection of them, giving you the sense of agency in the game and the feel that you have lots of means to support your strategy. It is a very well thought out ecosystem that is very intuitive, and despite perhaps the overwhelming look on the table, you very quickly grasp how your class works compared to other heavy Eurogames. It's also interesting how fragile the balance is in the game, as well as in the economy in general. You're constantly caring about what others are doing, and there is a thin line between competition and incentives for cooperation at every turn. Overall, I would say it's surprisingly fun for the seriousness and the heaviness of the theme. So that was it for today. If you want to know more about Hegemony, I'll have the link to the Kickstarter campaign page in the description below so you can check it out. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.